afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to Eleutheria, where we talk about all things liberty. And this afternoon, I have got a very special guest, probably the best guest I've managed to secure for the show yet. No offense to any of my other guests. It's just, Hermann Pretorius is from the Institute of Race Relations. And I was quite surprised when he said, yes, he'll come on the show. So here he is. And I think maybe the best way to start off is to let everybody know who the Institute of Race Relations is, in case there's somebody watching that doesn't know, and what you do there.
Cool. No, Beth, thank you very much. Firstly, for the invite. It really is a privilege to, as someone from a think tank, to speak to people not in a think tank. Because as much as I love my colleagues, I think that the curse of the think tank is to become ivory towery and to really live an isolated life. And I think we see it right across the world over the last 50 years, the golden age of think tanks almost, that if you fight the battle of ideas, you start engaging only with ideas and you stop engaging with people. So engaging with ordinary people like yourself really is the most important part of fighting the battle of ideas. Hayek had this idea of second-hand traders, that you have to populate liberty and ideas through several stages and several levels of popularization. And I think just actually engaging with people who have lives to lead, decent, proper people who have lives to lead, is something that think tanks often get wrong. So that's why I'm quite privileged to be here. And a preliminary apology if it sounds like there are little voices and little feet running around. I'm going to blame someone else. But yeah, so to the Institute of Race Relations. The Institute of Race Relations is a policy research think tank that was started in 1929 by a group of South Africans who really, I think, were ahead of their time in understanding that if you want to have a prosperous South Africa and a South Africa that has liberty built into its DNA, you need to understand race relations, and you need to make sure that people understand that liberty isn't a race-bound concept. So we are now in our 91st year of fighting the battle of ideas, and I wrote in a very shortish opinion piece over the weekend that was published yesterday about what the Institute of Race Relations actually does and what we do when we mean we fight the battle of ideas, because it's such an answer that doesn't really always satisfy. And the example I use in the article is the King and Country debate. In 1933, on the 9th of February, the Oxford Union had a debate on the motion, "This House will fight and die for King and Country." And the pacifist side of the argument won, 275 votes to 153, saying that they will not fight for King and Country. And the fascinating thing that then happened is Benito Mussolini, who was then Prime Minister of Italy for almost a decade by that point, really took note of that debate. And based very much on that debate, he thought that if there was a military confrontation on the European continent, Britain, in his words, were frightened and flabby old women. So they wouldn't engage, they wouldn't step up to the military confrontation. And I think that's a very good explanation about what the battle of ideas is. The battle of ideas is to make sure that votes like that go the right way, because these ideas have consequences. So the Institute is a classical liberal think tank. Individual liberty, individual freedom, responsibilities, freedom of speech, freedom of expression, property rights, all the good stuff. And we've been fighting the fight for all South Africans for about 90 years. And I'll bring this rambling answer to a close and hope that people from between these things understand what we try to do.
Yes, I'll admit I had no clue until last year that the Institute of Race Relations even existed. And I think that talks more to my own ignorance towards politics and thinking that it wasn't really something that mattered to me or that I needed to care about very much. To doing, then I just had this full evolution where I was like, no, actually, this matters quite a bit, because no matter where we go in the world, these political ideas are going to influence my life, and they're going to influence my children's life. And I think it's more because of the profound effect that it can have on my children that I decided to get more involved. And eventually I decided to get over my own shyness and introvertedness and start talking about it more and get involved in the battle of ideas, and sort of try and bring a more liberal conversation to more people, and also coming from a woman, because there's not very many women that seem very interested in the battle of ideas. I mean, they seem to watch it, but they don't really want to talk about it very much. So it's great to talk to someone who's been there and taking the ideas out to the people. And what prompted me to ask you to come on the show is the video that was published on YouTube last week of talking to people, businesses on the streets, about the effects of the lockdown. What is the feeling on the streets in South Africa?
I think it's desperate. In more ways than one, and I'll get to that in a moment. But allow me to backpedal for just a second and say that I don't think it's a mistake on your part to have only heard about the Institute of Race Relations a year ago. I do think that for about 90 years, let's call it the first 90 years of the Institute's existence, it had a very intentional mandate of, through proper research, data collection, data interpretation, have a drip feed into the conversation about liberty in South Africa. And it's something that we are quite proud of, that we have this track record. But a decision was recently made in the last few years to deliberately take on a more activist characteristic. We keep our research, we keep the sound data analysis and collection that really played a big role in exposing to the world what was happening in South Africa socioeconomically during apartheid. But there was a deliberate decision from our side to become a more active organization in terms of activism, and acknowledging that there are several fronts in the battle of ideas. One is just the policy and the analytics of it, and making sure that the ideas have substance, grounded in top quality research. But then, accidentally segueing into the rest of my answer, the documentary the 20-minute documentary, very simple, very short, where colleagues of mine went out on the street, that's really the next step of the battle of ideas, because you can debate and publish very good research and policy until the cows expropriate the farm. But unless you give liberty a human face, unless you show people that liberty isn't an abstraction, that prosperity isn't an abstraction, and that economic activity doesn't live on graphs and slideshows, unless you do that, you don't have a chance to win the battle of ideas. So that's why we went out to these traders in the first place, some colleagues, myself and some colleagues, to just give policy a human face. Because it is too often the case, especially in South Africa, where we have a history of such brutal failed politics, that a policy really hits home if you say, if you illustrate where the idea of abstraction intersects with the happiness, the success, the life enjoyment of a human being. So what's the sentiment on the streets when it comes to the lockdown? It's desperate. That's why the title of the documentary was Lift the Lethal Lockdown, a plea from devastated small businesses. And we had some crucial words when we were thinking about what the title would be. We knew lockdown needed to be in there. We knew lethal had to be in there. We knew devastated had to be in there. And we knew plea had to be in there. And around those words, we constructed the title, because the experience of speaking to these people was, I mean, just sobering and haunting in a way, especially Rashida, the cobbler who we spoke to. She told us about how she before lockdown, employed a few deaf people who couldn't get jobs elsewhere, and whose options for getting jobs really are limited. But as a cobbler, as a shoemaker, working with your hands, and they had a real opportunity not to be rich, not to be comfortable, but to get something. And
Yes.
I don't think I'll ever forget Rashida explaining to us that she had to let go of some of her deaf employees because her business didn't make a lot of money in the first place. But the fact that she couldn't even now work meant that she had to get rid of very, very vulnerable people. And Helen Suzman had this saying that, go see for yourself. Unemployment statistics is all good and well, but until you speak to someone whose voice breaks under the strain of the human weight of economic deprivation, you don't understand the poverty, and you don't understand the battle of ideas. And I speak from a very personal perspective, is that I've only been with the Institute for a year now, and it has been a sobering year where I've gotten to know the people of South Africa through data, but through personal interaction. And the more I get to know them, the angrier and more frustrated I get, but the more I love this country.
Yes. Yeah, it's that the documentary really hit me in the feels. You guys did an amazing job of getting the stories out there. Rashida's story especially. I'd like to know exactly where her cobbler shop is, because sometimes my husband needs his shoes resold and we haven't managed to find a decent place yet to get that done. So I do want to find out where her shop is, and hopefully I'll be able to support her. What I took away from specifically her interview was that she employed deaf people, and now we all have to cover our mouths, which means that there's probably a lot of deaf people in South Africa that cannot work, can't even find out, the way to the nearest bathroom or anything like that, because we've covered the only way they can communicate with that people.
To be fair, I hadn't even thought of that. And I think that's why you inviting me on this is so important, because I spoke to Rashida, and being in politics, policy, and socioeconomic considerations, my immediate and almost cannibalistic thinking about her situation was in terms of the human impact of socioeconomic decisions. And the loss of a job loomed so large in my thinking that I didn't even go the extra step to see that, and that's a mistake I think many people like myself make.
I'm sure a lot of people hadn't even thought of that.
But that's the thing, I didn't even think of that. I saw a lost job, and I saw a suffering income and a person suffering behind that income. But now that you mention it, that there's a further dimension of isolation to those people.
Yeah.
Good grief. Yeah, no. I mean, that's why people like me need to get out on the street, speak to ordinary South Africans, because people are not just statistics. They are That's harrowing. Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that, Beth.
I would say you're welcome, but it's more depressing, quite honestly. I feel for the deaf community because I don't think many people have given much consideration to how they might be experiencing this. I mean, I would be subtitling my videos if it was something that I felt that strongly about. So I wouldn't feel too terrible about what I revealed to you. But it just made me think that, you know, there's just so many levels that I don't think many people have considered, and definitely not the people that are deciding these policies. Definitely hasn't been considered. We're supposed to be inclusive and thinking for all the people, even the ones that can't always be included because of their disabilities and whatnot. And it's just not happening. And I think for me, that's just bugging me, because there's so much that should be considered that isn't being considered. And I don't actually see how many lives we've supposedly saved with this lockdown, because all I see is devastation. And today I was out, my mom wanted to go to the mall, so I dropped her off. And then she needed to do some grocery shopping as well. So I was just waiting in the car park. And I saw a security guard call another security guard over. And he'd obviously, somebody had taken their leftover food out of a restaurant or whatever and given it to the car guard. And these guys were sharing like a handful of chips. And I was like, is it that bad that even car guards that normally do get maybe a couple of $100 a day, that they're actually having to share leftovers? Is that how bad it is? And I mean, they're still clinging on to a meager paying job.
Yes, it is. It is that bad. And as powerful, how can I say this? There's a suffering. There's a disease in South Africa, I think, and it's not the virus. I think more metaphorically.
Yes.
And in treating a patient, any doctor or medical practitioner needs to do a few things. Actually, comfort this person in suffering, understand their situation, diagnose what has gone wrong, understand their symptoms, and then prescribe treatment, not just to cure the disease, but to also manage the symptoms. And this metaphor has helped me understand what the job of the Institute of Race Relations really is, because I wish, when people ask me now, what do we need to do? Well, you can answer symptomatically or diagnostically. The suffering we see is intense pain and intense symptomatic suffering of the disease, and curing or treating the symptoms, everything from a hungry child to a pothole, are symptoms of the South African disease. And if you feed a child, you do treat a symptom. You do something that a doctor or a medical practitioner must do. If you fill a pothole, you do something that you treat a symptom. You do something that must be done. You soothe, you comfort, you relieve pain. But I think in South Africa, one thing that lacks is the understanding that symptomatic treatment is not going to cure the disease. So the Institute of Race Relations, this might be a very crude way of looking at it, but it's the way I try to understand it myself, is we are chemotherapy. That documentary didn't make anyone feel better. It made people feel worse. But it's part of targeting the tumor. It's part of targeting the disease that you need to actually root out what has gone fundamentally wrong. Symptomatic treatment, relieving pain, bringing comfort. It's very important, and I think South Africa can be quite proud about of an active civilian population with many charities. And there's a very short anecdote where I spoke to an academic from Sweden once, and when the Middle Eastern migration crisis hit Europe about 3 or 4 years ago, the European, especially the Scandinavian infrastructure, really became overwhelmed in many instances because the Swedish government had been responsible for problem solving in that community for half a century, and the citizenry had almost become lazy in problem solving, societal problem solving. And this Swedish academic said to me that South Africa must count, despite its many sufferings, it must count the blessing of having an active citizenry that can get involved in problem solving as a blessing. So as much as we need to make sure that the suffering and the symptoms of pain in our society are solved or are attended to, what we at the Institute really try to do, and that's where the Battle of Ideas comes in, is to say that we need to target the sickness. We need to be the chemotherapy, and many other South Africans can be the morphine, but there's something deeper going wrong, and we might sometimes even look callous, because as much as you say that these security guards, my immediate instinct is to find them and to help them. And the same with Rashida, your instinct is we need to find this woman and support her. And as useful and as vital as that is, I'm going to sound callous, but I think it's true that by helping these people on an ad hoc basis, without fundamentally investing, like I think you are doing, and like we try to do, in addressing the underlying cause, the lack of liberty in South Africans' lives. If you don't do both, well, I think then you're a bad medical practitioner, you're a bad healer, as pompous as that might sound. So yeah, that's the rambling sort of thing I'm trying to convey here, is that South Africa is very sick as a patient, very, very sick. And we need people who focus on relieving pain and bringing comfort. But we need people who are willing to say, you need chemotherapy. And chemotherapy is, I've seen people go through it. It's harsh. But if it's not for that, you just have a patient dying comfortably.
No, absolutely. And that is not what South Africa needs now. I think we need high dose chemotherapy. And I think we need it in a central line, not just a normal IV line, if you want to carry on with your medical metaphor.
Yes.
I think it needs to be pumped in super fast. You've been on the street and you've spoken to people that are, and your colleagues have as well, that are probably feeling the ramifications of the lockdown the hardest. Are we seeing a sentiment in changing who we will be voting for next, or are we not going to see a change at the ballot box? Is it literally that we just have to get the ideas out there and start doing the work ourselves, the work that needs to be done?
Now, that is the $1 million question. Well, the trillion rand question. Or if we're going to take $1 million and put it into rands, the $23 question or something, then it's the $1 million rand question. That's a very crap joke, and I apologize.
It's okay. It didn't fall flat with me.
Well, that's a nice change for me. So the first thing is a few things. As very, very upsetting as I think these first 25 minutes of our discussion have been, I must set out a few hopeful things. I would be remiss and I would be selective if I didn't say, that there's reason for hope. So the question is, what happens now, electorally, politically, in terms of policy? So the first thing is, since 2012, the Institute of Race Relations have predicted or forecast or made the call that in 2024, the ANC will dip below 50% of the national vote in the 2024 election. So we've been saying that for about 8 years now. And the reason really is threefold. And we judge that based on three so-called mega trends: education, urbanization, and age. The ANC is on the wrong side of all three of those trends. And let me briefly explain why. The South African education system, despite all its failings, has improved over the last 2 or 3 decades in terms of what it delivers. In 1998-95, the white engineering graduates, as an example, vastly outnumbered black engineering graduates. And now, 2 decades later, we have a situation where black engineering graduates vastly outnumber white engineering graduates, but crucially, the number of white engineering graduates stayed relatively the same. So it wasn't just who's on top. There's a deliberate and a positive change based on what our education system delivers. People with an education up to tertiary level went from, I think, something like 4.7% to 8.2%. So it's not massive, but it's progress. And if you look at it's double. It's something to acknowledge. There's something that has not. Of course, a lot of things have gone wrong, and we might have a lot of time to talk about that, and we do spend a lot of time talking about that. But the first thing that we must understand is that in the 2019 and 2016 elections, if only people who had grade 7 as their highest qualification could vote, the ANC would get 70% of the votes. If only people with tertiary level education could vote, then the DA would get 50% of the votes. 50% of the votes. So, and then if you have, you've got grade 7, then you've got high school, and then you've got the university, and then there's this nice, very clear indication that the more educated a South African is, the less likely they are to vote for the ANC. Now, very big caveat. That is not to say stupid people vote for the ANC. And it is not to say smart people do not vote for the ANC. The principle that is illustrated here is the fact that if your life was so quite terrible in 1994, that the change from apartheid to this improved your material circumstances, then it's likely that you have a lower level of education. It's the mere fact that these people who have grade 7 as their highest level of education is more likely to vote ANC is simply because there was a positive change in South Africa in their lives materially from 94 until about a decade ago, and even perhaps maintained to present day. But the thing that should frighten the ANC is that the more educated the country is becoming, which it is, the less likely people are to vote for it. So that trend is against them. They are the victim of, let's not call it success, but they are the victim of a population achieving high levels of education. And there's a close correlation between high levels of education and not voting for the ANC. That's the first thing. Second thing is age. The ANC gets a lot of its votes from the older demographics in South Africa. So the reason for that simply being is the first 12 years of ANC rule delivered quite some good stuff. Then after that, it started going terribly wrong again. But between about 1996 and 2008, we saw some real progress. We saw for every shack built, we saw 10 permanent houses built in that first decade. We saw access to water skyrocketing, access to electricity going up, access to schools, and all these things really improved. And the older South African voter remembers that period of improvement. So, because they have personal experience of the ANC bringing about positive change in their lives, they are more likely to vote ANC. But then you look at the younger demographics or the younger generations, they do not have that experience. I mean, many people who are my age can't point to anything specific that the ANC might have done for them in the last 30 or so years, where my parents' generation of Black South Africans might actually say, I was allowed to vote for the first time, I was allowed to have a house for the first time, a tap in my house. You know, the previous generations saw legitimate improvements in their lives under the first decade or so of ANC governance. But then that changed. The government started going downhill from about 2009. So you have this problem where your older voters still remember the positives of the ANC in its early days, but these voters are becoming smaller and smaller and smaller and less electorally relevant. So they are being replaced by a younger generation not familiar with ANC successes. And if you look at it, about 50% of the South African population is under the age of 35. So the ANC vote is literally, and I'm going to sound callous once again, dying out, while they are not recruiting younger voters who are becoming of voting age now. So the first trend against them, education, they're on the wrong side of that. Age, the country is getting younger, they're on the wrong side of that. Their support comes from older South Africans. And then the third thing is geographic location. South Africa is urbanizing at quite a significant tempo. And if you are a city dweller, as it were, you are less likely to vote ANC than if you're a rural South African. So if we take that correlation and project it into the future, we have a problem with the ANC becoming a rural party in a country that is becoming an urbanized country. So these three mega trends for the last 8 years have been indicating an ANC loss in 2024. Now, I say an ANC loss and not another victory because they are going to dip below 50%. And the president of the IRR Council, Russell Lamberti, made a very astute observation very early on in this COVID crisis, saying that this crisis is a trend accelerator. So we need to understand that the ANC was going to lose the next election. We could have predicted that about a decade ago. They did not make sufficient inroads to protect themselves against these three mega trends. And now with COVID-19, these trends have been driven into overdrive. So the ANC is going to lose in 2024. I'm pretty sure of that. The question is, what then?
Yes.
Now, that's where the battle of ideas comes in. Again, because in an existential moment of uncertainty, a country will rely on the arguments it is familiar with that isn't the paradigm it's emerging from. That's such a pedantic way of saying that if you make sure that your arguments at the moment of crisis really dominates in numbers and in research and support, then you've got a good chance to shape the future. And that's what the battle of ideas is. There's a crisis coming, and we as South Africans need to be ready when that discussion comes. Right, guys, we've hit rock bottom. What do we build? That we have some building plans ready. That's what liberty in this battle of ideas is about. And a last anecdotal on this, to make sure that South Africans understand how change can happen. The 15th of August, 1985, sees P.W. Botha giving the Rubicon speech, saying, I will not lead white South Africa down the road of abdication and suicide. That's 15 August 1985. 10 years later, it's 1995, and Nelson Mandela walks onto the pitch at Ellis Park with 40,000 white South Africans chanting his name, him being their president. 10 years. That is how short it took from the Rubicon speech to the 95 World Cup. So when we talk about changes coming, that's the kind of change South Africans must remember has already occurred and can occur again.
Yes. Yeah, obviously we're not saying that it's going to be a racial change. It's just the mindsets of people can change. And I think if there's one thing lockdown has, it's taken some people longer to learn this lesson than others. And a lot of them shouted down opposers of the lockdown, such as myself, such as Marika, who's in the comments undercover as Rameka. Welcome. And other people that were very, very outspoken against the lockdown, is that we must defend our liberty.
Yes.
By whatever means is necessary. If lockdown hasn't shown us that a government that takes your liberties away will not give them back easily, if you haven't learned that lesson, then I don't know. I think maybe you need to go back to remedial school or something, because I'm not even going to be nice about it anymore. I'm not even going to pretend to be nice about it. You need to defend your liberty. And that is the way forward.
Yes, I think there's nothing. Again, I'm going to sound terribly schmaltzy, but rock bottom is a pretty solid foundation to build something new on. And the thing that lockdown, for all the suffering it causes, continues to cause and will cause, the one thing it has illustrated is what it looks like when a government takes away liberty. That is a very important lesson that I think South Africans have learned. And I think 50 years from now, we will pinpoint the moment the South African population of all backgrounds finally saw the ANC for what it was. And that was the moment when a cabinet minister thought it was his job to make a list of underwear the people of the country could buy. It's demeaning to the minister himself, but that'll be the moment, I think, in history where we will look back and say that's when the ANC finally abandoned any pretense of wanting a pragmatic, prosperous country, where ideology became so consuming that the underpants. I mean, there's a children's book called Dinosaurs Love Underpants. And I just think it is so appropriate. If you look at communists, they are dinosaurs, and they showed us they love underpants. So as destructive as this was to liberty, there is something to be said for, you don't know what you've got until it's gone. And yes. South Africa, for the first time, realized what it looks like when a government interferes so drastically and so tangibly and so visibly that in 5 months it made visible what it had been doing for the previous 10 years. The lockdown isn't a new thing in South Africa. We've been under economic for a decade. So I think to go back to your previous question, actually, will we vote differently? Well, I don't know. And thankfully, I'm not a politician and I'm not an electoral campaigning. But the thing that I can say is two things. Firstly, we have 35.9 million people of voting age in this country. Just over 10 million voted for the ANC last year. So we have 26 million voters who did not vote for the ANC last year. Now, I'm not one of those people to say, hence, the government isn't the government. I'm a bit of a constitutionalist in that regard. You have a right to pitch. If you don't pitch, you don't vote. So I'm not saying the government is illegitimate, but I'm saying that if the people of this country really wanted to, it can kick out this current bunch of fat socialists, and it can do it overnight. So that's the first thing, is that there is something to be said for, pitching up and voting. And I think that's something that ordinary South Africans can do. When the next election cycle comes around, identify one person in your life that didn't vote last time and convince them to vote this time. And if you don't know that someone, get to know them. Just one. Get one person who didn't vote last time to vote this time, and get them to vote for change, whether it's ACDP or COPE or DA or Freedom Front Plus. I would never say ANC or EFF, but there's scope here for people just to get one extra citizen with them to the polls and get some change going. That's the first thing. Second thing is, Margaret Thatcher said, before you win the vote, you need to win the argument. So that's what we need to do. That's what we need to do within the next 5 years, is win the argument. And a blessing in a brilliant disguise, lockdown has given us the best possible arguments for liberty and against state control and centralized control that we could have asked for.
Yes. Yeah, because now it's actually, people can't ignore it anymore. They can't take it for granted anymore. It's here, it's in your face. You're still being restricted. You're still being told that, yeah, sure, you can go to a cinema or you can go and sit and gamble in a casino, but you can't visit your family. So yes, it's in your face. And I know, I'm not sure if it changed. I have nieces and nephews that are 10 to 15 years younger than me. So in 2009, they were old enough to vote, I think, if I'm remembering correctly. And I said, right, so you're getting out, you're going to the polls and you're voting. Oh no, my vote can't make a difference. No, I'm not going to bother. I didn't bother registering. No, I'm not going to do it. Well, you know what? Auntie Beth, although you've never called me Auntie Beth, but now I'm going to put on my auntie hat and I'm going to kick you up your behind and I'm going to get you to register and I'm going to get you to vote and I'm going to make sure that you get all of your friends to vote. Because it's that same apathy that I saw in that age group that had just come of age then. Come of age when I say old enough to vote. It's that apathy that we're paying for now.
I think you're right, and I know some people who have genuine concerns with voting, and I would never say an election result can save this country, but my goodness, can it make a difference? It can just make that bit of a difference. And I've got a theory about what happened in South Africa over the last century. Is societal decision making was just outsourced constantly, almost from the Anglo-Boer War onwards. Just everything became the job of the government. There's something wrong, the government must fix it. There's something going on, I'm not going to investigate it or see for myself. The government and the police must sort it out. And I think white South Africans suffered of this, let's call it malaise, by just outsourcing their moral judgment to a racist government since 1948. And then in 1994 there was this change, and then South Africans went, oh, good, we voted now, change is now upon us, so good, we can go back to outsourcing our political moral decision making. And we just sit here with this situation now, is that liberty is always just one generation from extinction. And if never think for one moment that you can outsource what happens to you or your fellow man to some abstract government face somewhere. So that apathy, I think, is a South African issue that that not just the young generation struggle with, but that so many South Africans just outsource their ideological decision making to whatever body seems convenient.
Yeah, no, that's one thing. When I decided to homeschool my children, my mother said to me, but is that allowed? And I was so taken aback. I was like, of course it's allowed. like I can't outsource their education anymore because I don't feel like the system is serving them. I mean, yeah, it works for some people, and some people are quite happy, and certain schools are better than others and everything. And if you're in the financial position, you can go to private school or whatever. But like just that mindset of, but is it allowed? It's like, of course it's allowed. Look, I know in apartheid it wasn't legal. It wasn't legal. But like times have changed, and yes, it's allowed.
And I think that's another nice thing that the civil disobedience we've seen in lockdown has really made clear to South Africans, is that, the question isn't will your government allow it, it is will you allow your government. That's the real heart of the matter. So this thing of is it allowed, we should get we should get away from it. Now, I'm not an anarcho-capitalist like some of my friends. None of my colleagues at the institute I'm aware of are anarcho-capitalists, but some of the people that we hang out with and have intellectual sparring sessions with are anarcho-capitalists. I'm not one of those, so I don't think it's just I'm not a libertarian. I do think that the state has a role in the old John Locke sense of the word, but we do need to get back to a place of not saying, will the government allow me to do this? It's, will I allow the government to prevent me of doing this? And our CEO, France Cremier, is currently spending lockdown far away from civilization, and the wonder of Microsoft Teams makes it possible for him to still keep a close eye on us. But the thing that he told me the other day is, in many parts of the country, the existence of government is a fiction. So expose that fiction. And when people say that we are the next Zimbabwe, I'm skeptical. I think we're not going to be that disastrous, because we're not going to be that confrontational, simply because the Zimbabwean army was worth something when the government turned on its population. In South Africa, our state it doesn't necessarily govern by consent. It exists by consent. I just think South Africans should understand that they have a lot more power than they might want to have, but tough luck, use it and use it to make a difference.
Yes, you don't need to sit behind your electrified palisade fencing and shout at people that might be going for a jog in the street and not wearing a mask. Like, stop being jealous of the fact that they're exercising their freedom. Literally exercising their freedom, and get out there and join them.
And challenge the government to a point like, what is it going to do? And I mean, that's the thing, is it's, you can't fight for liberty always by avoiding confrontation. There's a level on which you really have to take stand, and that's where I was very much encouraged by the restaurant sector going out on the street, and not in a massive demonstration, but going out, and for the first time that I can remember, middle-class South Africans didn't see a protest as something to participate, but something to drive. It was an important moment for South Africans to acknowledge that you have pushback power, and perhaps we could look at that. What does pushback power mean in a democracy? Well, it means finding out what you can do, and it means if you are in a position and the only thing you can do is write a letter to a minister, and you have not yet written a letter to a minister, you are not being an active citizen, and you are not fighting for freedom. If you can get yourself to that point to write, let's say, a letter a month to a minister saying, you demand action on this or that or this or that, and you haven't done so, then I think you've got a problem. Once you reach that point of writing letters, then, and you still don't get the response you need. I don't know if you can hear the wailing and the gnashing of teeth.
I can.
I apologize.
It's not a problem. No, it happens
I think
here as well.
Someone heard I was speaking about a minister.
Yes.
I think that, and so if letter writing is the only thing you can do and you haven't yet done it, then now's a good time. And if you don't get a response on your 10th or 12th letter, well, start writing every week, and then get other people to write with you. There's a sense in which you will be shocked. You'll be shocked how much can achieved if South Africans actually bother engaging with their elected officials. And there's this idea, they won't listen, so we won't try. You'll be shocked how easily intimidated politicians are. So just try, think what you can do and do it.
Yes, what got me involved more in politics is the homeschooling community, because a new piece of draft legislation came out the end of 2017, I think it was, and they got us mobilized. They got all of us mobilized, and we sent letters in that we actually crashed the DBE servers. That's how many emails they received.
Well done. Good,
Yes.
good, good. Active citizenry. I mean, if you haven't crashed a server yet, you haven't been involved in a democracy. But from there's I don't have the People's War book now with me, but some of my brilliant colleagues, Anthea Jeffrey and John Kane Berman and Franz Grenadier, they've written books over the last decade, which are absolutely astounding. Anthea wrote The People's War, and then recently, I think in 2017, there was a revised or a shortened edition published, and then Franz has written his scenario planning books, and John published in, I think, 2014 or something, Between Two Fires. But the one thing that you will see if you read our stuff is that we probably understand the ANC better than they understand themselves. And part of what we need to understand and what South Africans need to understand about the ANC is they operate on this balance of forces idea. And it's a very, very simple idea that you test the waters, you make a proposal like expropriation without compensation, and you see how people react. If they react vehemently, that means the balance of forces isn't yet in your favor, so you have a tactical or strategic retreat. They did this with expropriation without compensation in 2007. And then the Institute was very active in opposing it then, and they realized, balance of forces wasn't in their favor. So they retreated with expropriation without compensation for a decade. Now, of course, it's back in the middle of the heated debate. But the thing is, the ANC and socialists in general are very dependent on this testing of the waters. Okay, let's float this idea, it gets shot down, good. We retreat until when we think there's a better moment to advance this idea. South Africans must understand that, and they must understand that they can intimidate the ANC far, far, far more effectively than the ANC can intimidate them. Because while the government is dependent on the balance of forces, the population is in charge of the balance of forces. If a policy is, it's almost like Neo in the Matrix. When Agent Smith really is chucking every possible punch at him, he realized his own power. Oh my goodness, I'm hearing myself say these things and I sound so stupid, but bear with me, the metaphor holds.
Cool.
By simply blocking every punch thrown, you start winning. By simply blocking every punch thrown, you start winning. And that's what South Africans started doing during this lockdown. They started blocking every punch thrown. That's how you defeat the ANC, not through some massive political realignment, not through, some massive embarrassment at the ballot box. You start identifying their punches and you start blocking them. And if you can't block them alone, then you get the homeschooling community or whatever community you're a part of, and you start crashing their servers. It's really as boring and undramatic as that. This isn't the Battle of Waterloo where there would be a bugle charging when the server crashes. But understand the balance of forces, understand what the ANC is going to do, and plan how you, your community, your group can stop them, can meet them at every punch, because that's how we win. The ANC is on their way out. There's no need to try and think we need to kill the ANC. The ANC is going to die. We now need to get them out without damaging the country too much. And that is about anticipating the punch, blocking the punch, throwing the counter punch. And if that's in the form of crashing the DBE server, I mean, all power to you. I think that's beautiful. That's a great example.
Yeah, they accused us of spamming the departments, but
yes, good.
Yeah.
I mean, that spam the government into frustration. I mean, let's start spam the government. The taxi industry, they're such an example to us people who want to fight for liberty. They just met the government on their own terms and the government capitulated. And all power to you, Beth. I think crashing the government server and crashing every possible government server through a mere overload of emails will now become my daily obsession.
I think it's a fantastic way to actually get them to take notice, because when they receive that many comments all in a space of a few days, they have to think, maybe this idea isn't such a good one, possibly.
the balance of forces, well, they might think it's a good idea, but the balance of forces wouldn't be in their favor. So they won't go for it. That's their approach. That's their methodology. So as long as we can meet them at every challenge and give them enough opposition, we keep them chasing after ideas that we won't allow them to get to a point of completion or implementation. It sounds incredibly boring, but it really works. It really genuinely works.
Yes. Yeah. I don't know what actually happened with that. I think it's still in draft stage, and they keep redrafting it and redrafting it and redrafting it, and pretty much we achieved what we wanted with commenting with what we said. They it can't pass because there was just too much opposition to it. So we have chatted for nearly an hour. I don't know if I can keep you just for a little bit longer and address some of the comments maybe.
Of course. When you say we've chatted, I feel terrible, but because I think you've sat there and I've chatted.
Well, you've had important stuff to say, so that's how these shows work. But a comment from a viewer, Chad, says, what I find shocking is the robustness of our constitution and how easily it has succumbed to tyrants.
Well, it depends on what you mean by the constitution. The constitution, the South African constitution is a decent vehicle. It's a decent vehicle. But I mean, even the best vehicles, when you have a power-drunk driver plows into, the barrier or a wall or the crowd, I don't blame the constitution for what's gone wrong. I really don't blame the constitution. If there's some constitutional instrument that I think is to blame, it's the voting system. I think there's a massive, massive lack of accountability in the voting system. Because, if you want to be in parliament, you please the leadership of your party. You don't please your voters. So I think the constitution has done, for what a constitution can do, I think it's done a pretty good job. I will never be one of those people to denigrate it. It has its weaknesses, obviously, definitely. But the constitution really is just a vehicle. And the voting system is the thing that decides who drives that vehicle. And it's the voting system that has been terrible in delivering accountability. So what I found shocking is the robustness of our constitution, how easily it has succumbed to tyrants. Well, can a constitution succumb to tyrants? No, a constitution just lays out how power relationship should work and how the state actors should actually function. And if those state actors are dishonest, are evil, I mean, what do you want the constitution to do? What constitution could have prevented this happening? I think I don't think it's useful to blame the constitution for anything that we've seen gone wrong.
And I think also what we need to take into account is our constitution is very young. It's 26 years young. It hasn't been tested fully. And for the most part, South Africans actually take it for granted.
I think so.
So what should have happened is when all of the lockdown regulations were announced, is there should have been a massive pushback from every single citizen in this country saying, no, that's not constitutional. No, you shouldn't be doing that. No, that's not necessary. But instead, what we had is we had a minority of people saying, you're going to fight to get your liberties back after this. And the majority was saying, no, but they're just trying to save lives. You must listen.
Yes.
He speaks so well. You must listen.
There is something to be said. Full disclosure, I could see the merit in the initial lockdown, the 3-week lockdown, and it would be dishonest of me to say that I was one of those early opponents. It might be useful for me to say, and politically, and for my career and my image, it might be nice to say, yes, I was against this from the beginning. I wasn't. I thought the initial 3 weeks seemed rational and reasonable at the time. So I wish I had then the insight and the foresight to be an initial opponent. But, you can only make decisions on the information you have at the time. And at the time, what we knew about the virus, what we knew about how it spread, and all that seemed to support an initial short lockdown. Now, then my adherence to that lasted 3 weeks, and from then on, I've become an increasing and aggressive and frustrated opponent. But something that we must realize is that the Constitution still holds some sway, whether we like it or not. We are still able to take the government to court. Will we be successful? I don't know. But you know how many countries in the world would kill to be able to take the government to court and can't because, it's not constitutionally possible. It might be constitutionally, in the technicality, but here in South Africa, we can sue the president. That's quite something remarkable. And I think that should be acknowledged as not a great, it's going to save us, but it's something useful. And the second thing is the ANC, for all its constitutional vandalism, still considers, for some reason, the constitutional settlement to be important. How do we know that? Well, they defend themselves in the courts. That means that they buy into the legitimacy of the courts to a certain extent. So at least they go through the charade of pretending that the Constitution matters. In the very least, they go through the charade. Also, with expropriation without compensation, they are going through the process the Constitution recommends. I think they're being dangerous and anti-liberty and committing human rights violations in that process. But at least they, even the ANC, can to some extent acknowledge that it has to please some form of constitutional requirement. And that's not nothing. It's not much, but it's not nothing. And South Africans should give the Constitution its due for that.
Yes. No, I agree. I think this lockdown has shown the flaws, and it might have made people more skeptical of it. But I think what South Africans need to remember is that they took it for granted, and they didn't, people don't actually understand it and know what it all entails. So I think, it's all fine and well to say, oh, well, it's no use having a constitution because X, Y, Z, like tobacco, court cases, etc., etc., etc. This is the first time that South Africans have really tried to test it.
I think you're right.
So I think don't lose all hope in the Constitution just because of what's happened now. Take it as a knock, a lesson that you have to learn from, a horrible, hard lesson, but take it as that. And, take that tiny bit of hope and run with that rather than just say, it's all just not worth it.
Yeah. And my previous answer was a bit of a rambling one, but I would love to perhaps get to a few more comments, and I'll keep my answers more coherent and short.
Fine. I didn't see any other questions. If anybody has anything that I might have missed and they want to throw it in now because everything has jumped down to the bottom, they're welcome to do so. Chad's comment was, if you hold that the Constitution has your liberties enshrined in it, then if you feel you have lost liberties in 2020, then the Constitution is not upheld to rigor. I think we did address that.
Yeah, I don't expect the Constitution to defend my liberties. I expect myself to defend my liberties, and I expect the Constitution to give me the right to defend my liberties. So it depends on what you expect the Constitution to be. It's not a magic bullet. But perhaps I could then end on some reasons for hope, some good things.
Yes. Yes.
83% of South Africans say that sports teams should be selected on merit, not on quotas. 84% of South Africans agree with the statement, I don't care what skin color my child's teacher is as long as that teacher is good. 58% of South Africans agree with the sentiment that merit should be the guiding principle for employment with special training for the disadvantaged. 22% of South Africans say merit alone should be the determining factor in employment. So that's, again, you look at an 80% score of merit, South Africans believing in merit. 76% of South Africans agree with the statement that with better education and more jobs, inequalities between races will disappear. 67% of South Africans agree with the statement that talk by politicians of colonialism and apartheid is a way of dodging accountability for their own failures. So why these useful stats? Well, because South Africans are far their moral superiors of the politicians. What has gone wrong in this country can be put right within a week. Because what has gone wrong with this country isn't this country. What has gone wrong in this country is a collection of fat socialists and nationalists, ethno-nationalists and socialists and statists that have for too long emasculated the people of this country. Now, criticism towards the people of this country for allowing that to happen. But if you for one moment think that the South Africa the politicians seek to portray, or the media seeks to portray, is the real South Africa, then I would urge you to do what Helen Suzman did and go see for yourself. Go speak to people and ask yourself, is this person looking different from me truly the racist I was believed that they would be? And I think you will be quite pleasantly surprised. There is something incredibly beautiful in this country. There is something incredibly valuable in this country. And I have hope. I have a lot of hope. In the short term, I think we're going to go through incredible difficulties. In the medium term, it's going to be one hell of a fight. But in the long term, I'm not quite at the point where I think South Africa is a lost cause. It's going to be one hell of a fight, but that doesn't mean we can't win it.
I agree. And that's coming from someone who is actively trying to immigrate 4 years ago. But I'm staying. And I'm not, it's not that dodgy Facebook group hashtag I'm staying, okay? I'm staying because it's beautiful here and because I believe that the best future here is here for me and my family.
And to every person who's in that I'm staying group, I'm good, stay, but stay and fight.
Absolutely.
Stay not because you're stuck. Stay because you have hope, because you think that there's something worthwhile in this country, that this is a place where you want to raise children, where you want to live a life that, I don't think any other place in the world could offer you. Don't stay and hope. Don't stay and put your head in the sand and think, oh, it's all going to be okay in the end. It's not. It's not going to be okay in the end unless we make it so. So, easy challenge to any listener or to anyone. Next election, identify one person that didn't vote in the previous election and get them to vote. Secondly, if you haven't started attempting to crash the server of a government department, then you haven't participated in the battle of ideas. Try that. Try these things. It doesn't have to be the charge of the light brigade. It sometimes could just be the charge of the stubborn citizen.
And I must just let you know that the homeschooling family community is maybe 100,000 families. So it really didn't take that many emails to crash the servers. Just saying.
Yes.
Just saying.
No. I think we have a lot. What's it? We have a lot to fight for. And I love Lord of the Rings. I absolutely love Lord of the Rings. And the quote in the Two Towers there, what are we holding on to, Sam? Well, that there's some good in this world, Mr. Frodo, and it's worth fighting for. That, ladies and gentlemen, that is where I leave you.
Thank you so much, Hermann. A couple of quite long questions have come through from Chad again. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask you if you would like to join me again at some stage.
Okay. Cool.
And then we can address those. Is that
cool.
okay?
Yeah. Yes. And then I can also try to be less rambling and less pedantic.
No, I'm not complaining about that at all. It's been an absolute pleasure talking with you. So Thank you everybody for watching and for all of the comments. What I shall do is I will go through them, see if there is anything that was overlooked, and I'll have Hermann on again at his earliest convenience. So thank you everybody for tuning in, and thank you Hermann for joining me and for having this wonderful conversation.
Beth,
And
thank you. Genuinely, I think you do more for the Battle of Ideas than I ever could.
wow, I will take that as a huge compliment. Thank you very much. And to everybody watching, you know what I always say, don't wear a mask if you don't have to, and just stay safe out there. And like, comment, subscribe, share it with your friends, and get them voting. Cheers, everybody.